Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Just going to settle in a moment for a second. Cheers. So this morning has been a lot like my week, um, and I'm sure you all can relate. It's been a lot of adjusting, adjusting to what is, things not quite going the way they were planned, and having to uh, adjust myself, bring in patience, bring in, how can I find a solution here? Without getting reactive, right? Without falling into irritation or any type of victim or unfairness. Just, okay, this is what's happening. This wasn't planned. This is what's happening, and I'm going to just work with it. It's a very powerful practice, resilience. And it's very practical. Just keep going, just keep swimming. Really, honestly, though, fundamentally, we only experience something as negative or going wrong when we don't believe it was supposed to happen, including my headset not just now turning off and having to turn it back on. Or earlier this morning, when for whatever reason Zoom wasn't uploading to Facebook. Fundamentally, the feeling of deep peace and like everything is going to be okay, it does come from this genuine place that nothing is ever really going wrong. Even though, yeah, on the surface, things can sort of fall apart or dissolve or go in the opposite direction that we were expecting. But a lot of enlightenment is resilience. It is just, okay, this is happening. Okay, that is happening. Okay, this is happening. Just constantly saying okay to whatever is in the present moment. And then the next level of that is trusting even more that whatever is happening in the present moment is supposed to be happening for our evolution. Um, Life doesn't stop with challenges, but we don't have to experience them as being so challenging. It's all dependent on our perspective. And what you'll find is if you really get caught up in a certain life challenge at the moment, globally or personally, if it's really intense, like really heavy, unbearably heavy, well, we always know that whenever we're in that state of like overwhelming and irritation or anger or anything like that, we have fallen back into the mind. We've fallen back into the thinking, into the story self. Because when you don't have the mind there, rambling on and labeling everything as good or bad, or this is supposed to happen, or that wasn't supposed to happen, then it really simply is, just as it is. Like, there's no expectation in the silent mind. There's no disappointment. There's no judgment. There's no there's no right and no wrong. Just is. But getting to that consistent state of resilience is not only very much a practice, it's also the key of enlightenment. And we just keep working with this moment. What is being asked of you in this moment? Where do you might feel challenged in this moment? What I find amazing though is when things are seemingly falling apart, it never really is. And oftentimes I do get the sort of satisfaction of seeing why exactly something did go a different way in a different direction. Maybe partly because I'm not so attached to figuring out the why. Often in life, when we're not really attached to figuring out why, the universe is like, all right, well, you can know why then. And then suddenly it dawns on you, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That would be a really valid reason why this, that, or the other went differently. Um, examples for with time, right? Let's say um, me being a few minutes late with this live video due to technical errors, out of my control, doing my best, just working with what is and running into a little obstacle here and running into a little obstacle there. Well, if I'm gonna be upset if I have this idea that the live must start at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It must. Not only that, but that is what's best for everyone, which is not true. I can't really know the complexity of knowing the exact timing of things is way beyond my human intelligence. And that's a huge part of getting to this place of constant resilience and of deep trust is in the trust of the timing and the trust of the complexities uh, and allowing things to kind of roll as they do because while we may not know why, we know there is so much more to the puzzle than what our minds are aware of. So, for example, if let's say I'm late with this video, right? Doing the best I can. There's no reason to stress over time, yet it's just not flowing. And I accept, I work through it. If this hadn't happened, number one, I may not be using this as the very talk for today, which perhaps somebody needs to hear. Number two, there's this really powerful timing involved in it all. Um, Even things being slightly off of the plan, of my plan, has this butterfly effect. Butterfly effect is a very powerful thing to meditate on. It's this the idea that a butterfly like landing on a car can have this ripple of changes. The butterfly landing on the car, the person noting the butterfly, the person becoming just slightly less, or it changes their routine just in this microsecond of a way. But in that microsecond of a change, it happened to create just enough distance in traffic while they're driving to not get in an accident, to then the other person didn't get in an accident. So then the family still get to have their family members, and on and on and on. Like it's quite amazing when you contemplate the butterfly effect, just how powerful every single detail of reality actually is. And to be honest, it's way past our comprehension. Um, and so again, this is where you can get overwhelmed if you think about that too much in the sense of like, oh God, I don't want to mess anything up. But at the same time, it also shows how powerful we can be even as just one little human being on this giant earth of billions of people, each of us can actually be incredibly powerful with the butterfly effect. And, again, this is why using these practices, doing your best, working on yourself, even when you become reactive, the fact that you're even trying to heal, trying to find self mastery, trying to integrate on a deeper levels, uh, all of that resonates outward. And, to a point where it's so complex that our minds can't even quite understand it. Yet it's happening. How you drive, how you walk, how you interact with every single person you've ever interacted with in your life. Think about that for a moment. How many people have you interacted with on social media, at work, in traffic? Even the slightest little moment of a relationship. So our actual reach is quite huge, especially when you consider the ripple effect of you, let's say you smile at somebody, and they just, for a brief moment, they just drop whatever they're thinking about and they smile. And they're like, oh, I don't know why he's smiling at me, but I appreciate it. And then in that moment, you gave them that brief, of course, my headset's turning off randomly. Turn it back on. But you give them that brief moment of stepping out of their story and feeling good. And then they go on through their day and they get in their car and they're driving and uh, you know, it's rush hour. And normally they would be just tunnel vision trying to get to where they're going. But there's a sense of spaciousness in them this time because of that little smile. And they see somebody really stressing to pull over or to pull in front and they just let them. And onward and onward and onward. This energy, this spaciousness, this kindness, this compassion truly does get passed down. We've seen, there's a lot of cute videos on Facebook now of that kind of concept, right? Of one act of kindness can get passed on, this whole pass it forward type of perspective. And it's so true. Um, and I just love contemplating how powerful we all really can be in our every moment actions or non-actions. And not to underestimate that, not to underestimate yourself or how much impact you actually can have on the world. Just by being yourself, even, not even by trying to change the world, but really just by focusing on yourself. Uh, so it's a powerful thing to sit with. And every time something comes in that challenges, that's like, well, this isn't supposed to go the way it's supposed to go. Like my headset turning off for the third time already. And having to turn it back on. Oh, that wasn't planned. And yet, was it? Yeah, like you can get to this place where even the things that don't go according to plan, you realize, oh, this actually is part of the plan, just not my plan. It's part of the plan. As I forget who says it, but thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I believe I mentioned that last week, and it's a very powerful phrase to remind yourself because every time something happens that you didn't plan, it just means that it wasn't supposed to. It's not about you. It's not about your plan at that moment. It's about a bigger plan. Uh, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven also points to the fact that the will is slowly but surely moving towards heaven, which is symbolic of like a very evolved, beautifully conscious, peaceful world, is my opinion. Um, and so everything that occurs, we have our plans, we have our ideas, and yet there's also this giant wave of what is that's constant in the present moment. And what I find is so much of life is learning how to ride with the wave rather than trying to tell the wave what to do, right? Rather than trying to tell life what it should do, what the divine should do, what, the universe should do. Instead, we stop and we say, what would you like me to do for you? And we get out of the way. Stop imposing our own opinions, our own beliefs, our own ideas. An example of this in my life, when I was younger, I've been playing guitar for a long time, but when I was younger, I really wanted to be a rock star, like, Jimi Hendrix or something, just on stages, traveling the world, playing, rock and roll and the blues. And I remember being a bit upset about the fact that it just wasn't flowing. Like, I'm a decent guitarist, but I'm not Jimi Hendrix level. Uh, but I just never ran into the right people. I never found the right drummer or the right bassist. It just didn't flow. It felt forced. And in which case, as I got older, I realized it's not because it's just unfair world and this, that, and the other that I used to fall into. It just simply wasn't actually meant to be on my path in that moment for various reasons. And it's funny because back then I didn't even have any idea of being a spiritual guide because I hadn't had gotten into my own spiritual life yet. And yet, it sort of just shows how when things are going in a direction we are disagreeing with, and if we can just slow down and trust, okay, this isn't going the way I want, but it is going somewhere. And in retrospect, we get to see the reason why, and perhaps you could sit for a moment and ask yourself, as when you were younger, what plans didn't work out, what paths kind of dissolved, and perhaps now you can see why. Now that you are where you are now, you can see why those ideas didn't work out. Which also actually ties into in various ways forgiving our past. Forgiving the past is a very important part of awakening, of enlightenment. Forgiving every single detail that has ever occurred in the past, which is pretty wild because even what you were thinking 30 seconds ago is now past. It is not present moment. This is present moment. Right here is present moment. What you were thinking 30 seconds ago, 3 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, and on and on and on. Yesterday, the day before, the week before, the month before, the year before, on and on and on. Anything that is not in this moment is either past or future. And so much of our sense of self we derive from the past, um, especially the painful things for some reason. I don't know why our brains do that, or our minds, or our psychology does this, but for whatever reason, we find a comfort of identification with things that have occurred in our past. And it's really important to look at. Because you are present moment. You are this moment. In the form that is watching right now. You are the present moment in the form that is listening right now. And present moment, in and of itself, goes way beyond gender or age or ethnicity, cultural upbringing, political opinions, all of it. Like, present moment goes beyond all human things. And when you know yourself as present moment, enlightenment is the natural state of present moment. If you know yourself as the human, as the story, as especially the story, especially your past. It's even the word your. Why is the word your past? What is this you that is sort of attached or latched on to a giant pool of memories that you've experienced in this form? Why does that happen so seamlessly? Not that it's right or wrong, but just investigate that. Or maybe investigate when you're thinking and you're using the pronouns I, me. Where is this sense of self? Even the identification we have to our names, right? My name's Ryan. No, present moment doesn't really have a name. Our human forms have a name. But this is very important to going much deeper into awakening. Awakening is waking up to the truth and really genuinely integrating what is true and what is illusion. And in the absolute, your human form and your human story is a story. It is an illusion. Um, because the only thing that's not an illusion, as my headset turns off again, the only thing that is not an illusion is this moment, right here. What does the mind have to say about that? Hmm. I don't know. Or, oh yeah, I agree with that. Here's something really valuable as you're listening to these talks, or any spiritual talks for that matter. Also, pay close attention to how the mind's coming in, sort of chiming in, commenting internally on, like, oh, I agree with that, or oh, I disagree with that, or, and putting in these, like, injecting these perspectives of interpretation within the very things that are being shared. It's a very interesting thing to observe. So just notice, listen, as I'm talking, listen to the voice in your head. If it is speaking, perhaps you are in just silent observer. Beautiful. Enjoy. But if it is speaking, catch it, notice it as I'm talking. Especially since things that are getting pointed at, like the identifying with the false self of the past, it's going to be very abrupt for the mind. It's going to be very uncomfortable for the ego. So sometimes, it's almost like the ego in and of itself has this survival mechanism. And somehow it knows that if it can just keep chiming in, keep commenting, keep you know inserting itself into the game, then it can maintain its survival. And then, but then when you're listening to something that's potentially threatening it, you might feel some resistance inside. So listen to the feelings as well, um, and recognize these feelings and these thoughts while they're both happening. Investigate where that sense of self is. Where is me in all of this? Am I Where am I? The deep levels of awakening are also very subtle levels, very subtle. You have to be very, very acutely alert, aware, and sensitive, like a surgeon. to find the slightest sense of self that is invested in the thinking mind or in the emotional pain bodies. Part of healing our pain bodies is genuinely recognizing that we aren't the pain body, that we're experiencing pain or emotional reactivity, but it is not us. Then who are we? We are the awareness that is aware of the pain body being there. Which is why, whenever you become aware of a pain body, that's a huge success. The moment you become aware of a pain body is the moment you can step out of it. If you recognize yourself as the very awareness, rather than as the as the entity that's experiencing the pain, you are the awareness of an entity that's experiencing pain. That's where a huge moment of spaciousness can be created within that feeling of it, and that feels so real, right? Pain bodies feel so real, so heavy, so uncomfortable when they hit us, or when we find ourselves almost feels like we're drowning in a pain body. Yet the real transcending of it, once and for all, comes with recognizing its own nature as being an illusion. And the pain body or the mind does not like to hear that it is an illusion. It doesn't like it, but it's a strong statement, but it's a very powerful one to actually dissolving it once and for all, so to speak. Because whenever it does come back, you kind of recognize, oh yeah, here's that movie again. Oh yeah, here's that story again. It's a very clever director going on. Very good producer, but still a story. So much of a regular enlightened experience, too, is simply that. Simply recognizing when you're in a story, a mind story, and going, oh, I'm in a story right now. Meaning there's some kind of story playing over and over in your head of what's going on with you, what's going on with someone else. It's just some kind of like this commentary. It may involve more than just a voice in your head. The stories that we hold on to and that create suffering in us also can be in the imagination, as far as like the visual. There can be like a visual sort of daydream like experience when we are in a story. Um, so it's a really powerful thing too, is to recognize when you've fallen into any kind of story. And the range of this is practically infinite. The mind can come up with so many stories. And also recognizing, being in a story isn't bad or wrong. You just recognize it so you have the choice. If you're enjoying the story, by all means enjoy it. But if you're not enjoying it, then contemplate putting it down, which is what so much of conscious practice is. It's not about it's not about just constantly living in a state of silence necessarily. What it means is you have choice. You have choice to consciously create. So, if you want to, maybe you want to create a story. You enjoy the adventure, the beauty, and in which case, by all means, embrace the stories, enjoy them. However, when the story turns into a nightmare, when it turns into lots of pain and pain body and anger and resistance, then you have to choose. Do you want to be suffering right now? You have a choice as to whether you are suffering right now, and it is fully dependent on whether you are willing, really willing, to just drop the story, or not. And in some ways it's interesting because nobody would ever like consciously choose to suffer, right? That's why it's unconscious. It's a pattern deep in us. There's there can be parts of us that actually are a bit addicted to suffering, a bit addicted to the feeling of anger, which I experienced the other day, and I noticed there's a certain power behind a feeling like anger that I believe it gives us this really powerful experience, even though it's very unstable and chaotic. Um, I believe that's why a lot of people almost like constantly manufacture it within themselves by going into these stories that some part of them knows is just going to piss them off, yet they still do. Because I believe it gives some sense of power. Yet, this power that we get from stories is nothing compared to the power of conscious choice. So it's like if you do find that some part of you likes the power and maybe like the adrenaline rush or whatever it is, that intensity that overwhelms you when you get angry or when you feel sad or when you contemplate stories in your past that were very traumatic or painful, and there's some part of you it's almost like there's a pleasure there. Notice that. Don't make yourself wrong for it, but notice it. When you can really zero in on that part within us that enjoys, it's like a masochist type of thing. It enjoys the pain a little bit. There's almost a pleasure within the feeling of being a victim. It's kind of hard to describe, but you just gotta really zero in on yourself, really listen to yourself, be honest. You don't need to impress anyone. Yeah, you don't need to keep up some standard of anything. But just but just and that's the beauty of observation. Observation is non-biased. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't have a self-image it's trying to protect. Truly objective awareness is just whatever is there is seen. There's no hiding from it. There's no denying it. Man, our minds, our egos, masters of denial. Masters. It's unfortunate. But denial is such a big topic and a really important piece of deepening our awakening is really being strong and confident in calling out our denials, really looking at them. Denials is another word for shadows or blind spots. Technically, no blind spot could exist if we just put down all of our denials. Denial always hints at some false self that we're still identified with as well, some mind story or some self image that we're still trying to cultivate and protect. But yeah, so the next time you experience a pain body, just, do a real genuine, honest observation within you of, is there any part of me that enjoys this? As silly as that may sound right now, just experiment with it. Is there some part of me that it's really what happens too is it's not the word joy isn't right, and yet there's some part of you you don't realize is holding on to the story. That part of you that is still recreating the story over and over and over again, the mind story, is the very part of you that is addicted to the pain body, that is addicted to the suffering. And that is the root of ego. Because ego thrives, its fuel is suffering. That's why it likes it. It's like food to the ego, to the false self, to the surface self, to separation, to to illusion. And so that part that actually likes the pain, it gives you a sense of self, even though it's a very uncomfortable and imbalanced self. It gives you something. Uh, really zero in on that. Notice it. Don't judge it. Don't give it more negativity, or it's just going to eat, it's going to keep consuming and strengthening itself. But just observe. Okay, yep, now I see it. There is a part of something in me that likes the drama. Otherwise, I would just return to silence. Within myself. Things can keep happening around the world, but I'm no longer looking for problems. I'm no longer looking for things to upset me. Things to be upset about. No, just constant forgiveness. And if there's any hesitation or cringing feeling inside of you, when you do observe some little bits of insanity, some like when you do observe a small part of you that realizes, oh man, I'm holding on. I'm actually recreating this painful story over and over again in my mind because some part of me actually likes the pain, likes the suffering. If you feel a cringe or resistance in that, then observe that next too, because that is really, it's just the mind coming back in, making up another story. That's the really tricky thing about stories too, as far as like the relationship between stories and suffering, mind stories and suffering, is that we catch them, we work through them, and yet we can actually create a story about stories now. we can we can have mental stories about being enlightened or about pain bodies because now we have all these extra words to play with, and while they can be powerful, they can also become obstacles. So fair warning. In the only way to really catch this and to step out of that whole loop is to be really present in this moment, right now, and listen to what anything that might be being said within our brains, within our minds, and also listen to how we're feeling. Listening to how you're feeling is a very important part of it as well. And keeping this internal awareness, it's like a flame, a light. Keep it keep it on. Keep this internal awareness on as much as you can. This is so much of the practice. Just listening to how you're feeling and what you may be thinking. It's a deep state of meditation, really. When we sit in meditation, the idea is to really turn up our awareness or our ability to hear what's happening inside of us. Now, the beauty of this internal awareness is that you don't need to be seated in a quiet room to have this internal awareness. Technically, you could be in the most chaotic environment you could fathom and still have internal awareness because it's not dependent on anything on the outside. It's simply dependent on where is your attention right now. And learning to cultivate, to masterfully guide your attention. And a lot of awakening and enlightenment is really taking that attention that's always looking outside. Loud noise happens. What is that? You know? and and bringing a lot of that light and turning it inward. And just as much as you're curious of what's happening in the outside world, be genuinely curious about what's happening in the inside world. A beautiful manifestation quote by Eckhart: get the inside right and the outside will fall into place. You can't get the inside right if you're not paying attention to the inside, yeah? Our physical world and how we're conditioned is you got to get the outside right first. Then the inside will be good. The inside is dependent on everything on the outside working. That's our fundamental belief. That is not true. That we know from experiences over and over and over again that that is just not true. Because it's never ending. It just doesn't work. So instead, we take a different approach. Okay, instead, I'm going to focus on getting the inside right first. And then the outside will fall into place. And it really does. That's the magic of it. Like, it really does. Miracles happen. When you start going deep within, I bet just about everybody here can relate to this. The fact that the more you go deep within yourself, the more you turn your attention and your awareness from, instead of focusing on everything that's happening in the outside world, focus on your inside world. And when you do, miracles happen. Coincidences, synchronicities, things that just break the realm of probability even. Things just sort of magically start to flow around, and it's such a lovely, adventurous experience to feel that interconnected with reality. Whereas when you're only focusing on the outside world and you're trying to fix the outside world so that you can feel better on the inside, you see everything as separate, you see everything as chaotic, as threatening, because, and it's because when you're only looking at the outside world, as my headset dies again, when you're only looking at the outside world, there isn't a balance. If you're only looking at the outside world, you are separate from everything because there isn't the balance of the inside world in you. So listen to what's happening in you just as much as you listen to what's happening on the outside. As much as you might like to watch the news or listen to dramas or gossip, maybe not. Maybe you're kind of pushing past that, but still, my point being, be just as interested in what's happening inside of you at all times, especially right now. Especially right now. The more you start to pay attention to your internal world, meaning how you're feeling and what you're thinking, the more you start to have choice. When you're really paying attention to how you're feeling and what you're thinking, you are much more able to respond to situations versus being reactive. If there's no internal awareness, something happens on the outside, it triggers you, and the reaction comes out just like instantaneously almost. Cause and effect, right? When there's this constant state of internal awareness, there's also a sense of peace, of stillness, of spaciousness. So when something happens that normally would upset you, trigger you, you would become reactive to, it happens. But before you have a reaction, there's this moment of pause, this brief moment where you feel, because you're present, you feel the reactivity happening inside you. You go, oh, here's some suffering. Oh, here's some anger. Here's some stress. Here's some fear, whatever it is. Maybe not even labeling it, but just, oh, here's something in me. Because you're paying attention. And then also, oh, here are some negative thoughts. Okay, are these thought patterns, these ones that are sort of negative in the moment, are they coming from that emotion? Or maybe is the emotion coming from those thought patterns? But all this is happening within like a half a second. This is how amazing our brains are, or our intelligence is. Something triggers you, and in that brief second, you have this huge contemplation of what am I experiencing? Where is it coming from? What's the source of this pain? And what will I choose to do now? All of that happens like within a second. And that's conscious choice, because in that 1 second, you get to decide. Are you going to yell? Are you going to freak out? Are you going to honk your horn? Are you going to flip somebody off? You know what? Like, and in that brief moment, you've gained consciousness, because unconsciousness is the blinding reactivity. There's no choice. Conscious is choice. Unconscious is no choice, which is also how we can forgive people that are operating in insanity, because they don't have a choice. They don't have that spacious consciousness to stop and go, what am I doing right now? Why am I doing this? What story am I feeding? And that's where so much of this practice becomes very practical and very, very powerful, is you're staying alert to how you're feeling, what's going on in your internal world, and you're bringing in more choice as to how you respond to life. Now, also on this topic, reactivity happens on two levels. The obvious level most people see is the outside level. It's, I don't know, something happens, right? Maybe it upsets us. The outside level is how you act physically to that response, right? Maybe yelling or throwing something or hitting somebody, violence. It's either physical or it's verbal, psychological violence, but it's some form of violence, reactivity. And in our brains, it's always justified. However, so that's just the physical side. That's the secondary side. What happens before the outside reaction occurs? It's very, very quick, like microsecond quick. However, there is a microsecond in there where you can bring space, because any outward reactivity always starts from an inward reactivity. So maybe, for example, you've seen like a waitress or waiter, they're upset, but you have to put on a fake smile. You gotta like, it's kind of creepy, honestly, when I see people with fake smiling. It creeps me out. But not that I think they're wrong. I get it. You're taught you have to have that professional image. Even when you're having a bad day, you gotta have this fake smile on. um, but any outward reactivity starts with inward reactivity. Like if you weren't feeling angry inside, you wouldn't express any anger outwardly. So when you're learning to or practicing and doing your best to be non-reactive, yes, it's good to try to focus on I'm not yelling or cussing or throwing things or being outwardly violent in any way. However, if you want to get to the source of your reactivity, then you have to look at the internal reactivity. Doesn't matter how much you're smiling on the outside. If you're pissed off on the inside, that's where the reactivity mastery really is. It's working on that inside. Not saying the right things, but feeling the right thing, so to speak. And again, we do this by internal awareness, by honest, objective, internal awareness, really listening. How am I feeling in this moment? And if there is any reactivity in there, we can notice it. Go, okay, there's some reactivity in me right now. And the idea of not experiencing inner reactivity is enlightenment. It's also, I get it, it may seem a bit intense or like impossible, but it's not. Because every time you become aware of internal reactivity, and by aware I mean observe it, notice it, listen to it. Every time you do that, you bring a spaciousness into that. You're bringing awareness into a much subtler level of reality, your internal world, which also is actually very connected to the external world. But that's where the mastery is cultivated, is you just keep bringing in your internal awareness to when you have reactivity within. Constantly doing this, and not putting a time restraint on it, not saying, okay, soul or Atman or self or whatever, we're gonna be enlightened in 1 year. So if you're not in this mastery non-reactive state in a year, we're gonna have problems. No. Story. Mind. Expectation. It doesn't matter how long it takes. What matters is that you're just constantly paying attention to internal reactivity, to internal emotion, and not allowing the mind to make stories out of it, not allowing all these sneaky games of the ego, like expectation or disappointment or comparison, comparing ourselves to some other master like Eckhart or Ramana Maharshi or something. No, you are exactly where you are. You are supposed to be where you are, just as everybody else on the planet, including the people that challenge you the most. And yet you are where you are. And we just keep listening. What I find really interesting too is the more we practice this internal awareness, whether it's in seated meditation or we start to venture into bringing it into our everyday lives, the more we do so, it's like a muscle that strengthens, a presence muscle, so to speak. The more we do so, the stronger our presence becomes, the more sensitive in a way, but like sensitive in the sense of like hearing the quietest, the most subtle of, of thoughts, the quietest, the deepest, these deep levels of beliefs that are deep within us, these fundamental beliefs that we have, they're so deep, right, that they're like very quiet. They're like muffled because they're so far in the ground, so to speak. They're really muffled. So you have to be very, very alert to hear them. And you get to that high level of alertness by practicing right now, by listening right now, and constantly listening right now. And remembering reminder after reminder after reminder. So much of this practice is just reminders. Like it's crazy. Uh, but maybe crazy isn't the right word, but it's just like so much of this practice is just remembering. Um, Remembering the practice, remembering the perspectives, remembering to step out of the story, remembering to breathe, remembering to remember. Last thing I'll say, because this hour is coming to an end here, the practice of being internally aware, constantly listening to how you're feeling and what you're thinking. For some, it may be intimidating. It may be scary. There may be a lot of things going on inside you that you've been in denial about. Dark thoughts, or heavy pain emotions, or fears, or whatever. Um, maybe. Maybe maybe that's there. Maybe there's a little bit of hesitation of like, oh, I don't know how much I want to look into into that closet. Well, recognize that also as a feeling. Yeah, it's just another feeling, another story. So if the mind or if some part of you is reacting to even the idea of being internally aware all the time, listen to that reaction. Be internally aware in this moment of that reaction. And it's something that we just work through at our own pace. It's not like, I mean, maybe you'll feel enthusiastic about just being as presently aware as humanly possible right now for the next week. Like you don't drop it at all. Just listen, listen, listen. Beautiful. However, if you don't feel that enthusiasm, you also don't necessarily want to force. We want it to be having a natural flow. Um, there is something about when we're too forceful with awakening, we just create more obstacles as well, right? I had a friend who started meditating for like 3 or 4 hours a day, and he was being too forceful. He was chasing enlightenment too with too much hunger, um, and it became a big obstacle for him. So really honor, work with where you are, and keep it simple. Just just listen. Listen to yourself. And remember, remind yourself. This is why I highly recommend the the mindfulness bells of like Thich Nhat Hanh. So you have on your phone or whatever, it rings, and you hear it, and you go, "Oh yeah, breathe. Oh yeah, drop the stories." When you drop a story, final piece here. When you drop a story, it doesn't mean you have to delete it forever. By the way, like let's say I don't know something's going on in your life, it's creating some stress. When you drop the story, it doesn't mean it's like Control Alt Delete, it's gone forever. It's more like you just put it down on the table, and it's there. But for a while, you're just gonna rest, relax, rejuvenate, reset, refresh, which is really important. If you don't refresh, you're not gonna be able to pick it back up and really find a solution, right? So being able to step out of a story, out of a problem, put it down for just a little while, and enjoy a state of completeness without even needing to complete that thing. Once you feel refreshed, then you can pick the story back up and contemplate it, figure it out. Maybe if there needs to be things figured out, or maybe you find that it was, uh, you know, it wasn't serving any sort of useful purpose. In which case, yeah, maybe you would like to delete it permanently. Like you delete your picture, and then you got to go into your photos and delete the deleted picture, so it's really gone. A lot of our past we could do that with. A lot of our traumatic stories and stuff we could do that with. It's like, okay, I've learned enough from this. Let's delete it now. Okay, so thank you for sharing this moment with me and for listening to the external and even more important, listening to the internal.